Good evening, everyone. It's Friday evening, November 28th, 2025. It's around 10 p.m. On Vancouver, Washington time. And I was thinking about what to record tonight. Sometimes I kind of run out of ideas, and I know just continuing to add more content to my channel builds more videos, but I'd like to make some things that are interesting to a portion of folks that are interested in the creation process, improvisation, just understanding what goes on behind the scenes when constructing music that is improvisational. And so I thought tonight I would spend a little time in a little higher level context than what I normally do. A lot of times I get into the harmonies, the chord progressions, the scales that I'm using, and so forth. Tonight, I thought I would get more into the sounds and variations between the different keyboards and describe a little bit of kind of my creation of the, what would I say, the workflow and the keyboards that I use in an improvisation. So many times when I'm doing this, I go back and listen to what I've done in the past. I'll actually have my playlist on, and it'll select different songs from the past, and it'll bring up memories of different scenes or programs that I've used that I've forgotten about. So today I had heard one of my older improvisations, and I had used one of the sound files on the JupiterX, which was the brass rail. It's like Bank 2 Program 12 on the Roland Jupiter X, and it's a kind of a sharp brass sound. So I'm going to be doing everything in A minor tonight, just because I've talked a lot about the A minor scale, the chords, and so forth, so I don't have to get into those as much, but more about I'm going to construct the sounds and the sequence of sounds, what I'm doing where, and I'm going to add a little bit of embellishment of essentially how I transition from different sequences in the improvisation. So tonight I'm starting with this Bank 2 Program 12. I like that sound. Now, the other nice thing about that is the JupiterX aftertouch, which means if you hold the keys down and you press them harder, it actually changes the sound, so you can hear that. Now, in addition, if I press this repeat arpeggiation button here, it changes it from a single note to so I can create some interesting patterns and play other parts of the improvisation in other keyboards. So I've got that set up here, and that's kind of my base. So when I go in and do an improvisation, I think about, well, what's kind of one of the unique, outstanding programs from one of these keyboards, scenes programs, whatever you want to call it, but it's kind of foundational. It sets the stage for everything else. Then how do I build sounds around it? Well, one of the things that I thought about this was I'd like to put together kind of what I would call more of a pipe organ fanfare sound, and I've put that on the Roland Fantom here. I'm using what's called scene D8. Well, that's not, it's called fanfare. And it's a set of tones that are constructed together, sound more like a fanfare with a pipe organ as well. So that is a contrast with the brass. Now, in addition, one of the things that I did with my studio is I added a pedal board, a Studio Logic. It's not like a full American Guild of Organists 32-note pedal board. It's smaller, it's 13 notes, but it allows me to play the bass sometimes with my feet instead of using my left hand. It allows my left hand to be free, and so I can play the bass note down on the Studio Logic key, pedal board down there and create the fundamental note or the bass note and allow my hands to be free to create more complex patterns. Now, what I have set up here, what's set up is that pedal board goes into my digital audio workstation software, which is Ableton Live, and then it is routed over to another keyboard. I can route it to any keyboard I want to. It's just sending MIDI notes out, but what it's routed to is the Moog Matriarch, the Moog Grandmother, which is this top keyboard on the other side of my setup here. That is a 2-oscillator analog Moog synthesizer, and it works great for bass. So I've got it set up with a triangle wave with a fairly deep pitch and 2 oscillators working together in tandem, but an octave apart. So when I press a pedal board note down here, like if I press the key of A down here, it is going through my computer into the Ableton Live, being routed to the top keyboard on the other side of this display and playing the note A. So that press of the note down below is the same as me putting my hand on this note, which is an A, an A on the Grandmother. So now I have an extra foot to use to make the sounds more complementary to each, and it just allows my left hand to be freer to do other things besides play the fundamental note. So that allows me to play the brass up here. Now I can come down here and play. Now, see, I've just put my left foot on the key, the pedal board note A, and my left hand is playing the Fantom on the fanfare scene. So now, so see, I can actually, I don't, typically when I'm playing without my feet, I have to have the bass kind of covered, the foundation covered by my left hand. But instead now, if I want to go to any keyboard, I have 2 hands to play other patterns that are not the foundational note, the fundamental note. So that gives me more flexibility. Now, if I decide, one of the things I like doing when I'm doing improvisation is I like changing up sounds. So I might do a pipe organ, or this fanfare and this brass, but then I want to have something that will kind of change it up and make it a more quiet ambient sound, or piano or something like that, or another brass. So one of my favorite sounds, as many of you know who've listened to my music for a long time, is comes, I guess, is inspired from the movie Blade Runner, but it is called Runner Blade, and it sounds like this on the Korg Prologue, which this keyboard, again, is an analog keyboard. These two and the Kronos, these three keyboards that I have here, the Roland Jupiter X, the Roland Fantom, and the Kronos, are all digital workstations, whereas the Korg Prologue is it's a combination, but it's primarily an analog synth with a digital third channel. And then the two Moog keyboards over here, the Matriarch, which is on the bottom keyboard, that's this one right here, and then the top one, which is the Grandmother. Those two are Moog analog synths. Now the Matriarch is a 4 oscillator synthesizer, and the Grandmother is smaller at 2 oscillators. That's why the Grandmother I usually use for bass or fundamentals or just single note playing, although it has got a lot of capability to do arpeggiation patterns and so forth as well. I just don't use it that way because I've got other instruments to do those things for me. So I'm going to play around a little bit with this, and I'm going to just kind of try some different patterns out and see what I want to do. So I'll probably start like with an improvisation. When I do an improvisation, I kind of lay out a pattern of where I want to start. I have some other ideas of what other instrumentation I want to use down the road, but I never really have a set pattern of what do I do first, second, and third. But you always have to have a starting point because otherwise you're not going to start. So I think about, well, what do I like first, and how do I want to complement that pattern and those sounds? And then I just let myself go and play around. Now, many times I will set up the keyboards with a specific set of sounds, so at least I have a default. If I want to go to that default, I can. Many times I will change that default on the fly because I go into a sequence of music or improv, and I get a different inspiration, and I say, well, gosh, I'd like to do this instead of that. And so I'll change up the scene, the programs very quickly and go a different direction. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. When I'm playing live, I have to make it work. And so therefore, whatever happens is the first step of the next sequence. If I'm recording something and uploading it, I have a little more flexibility because there are times when I want to do something, and if I don't do it the way I want to, I'll start over because I'm not happy with a version of the improv, and I'll do it a couple times. I can do it up to maybe 5 or 10. Sometimes if I'm having a stale night, it might be 15 or 20. But many times I can sit down when I'm doing live music, and I've got I'm piping out to the world, and spontaneously, I'm more careful with what I do because I know that I want to be, I don't want to go into something that doesn't work, and so I'm more guarded. But if I'm recording music, it gives me a chance to be a little bit more avant-garde. And if it doesn't work, you know, and I don't like it, then I can, you know, redo it. Okay, so let's try a little bit of this. I'm going to do it in the key of A, and I'm just going to play around a little bit. Now, on the Korg, I think the variation, I got fanfare here. I think on the Korg, I'm going to create a piano sound. Now, that is including, I'm actually got the Korg always connected to the Roland Fantom channel 1 or zone 1. So I'm always coupled. So I've got this fanfare sound on this keyboard. So I'm playing one of the channels on here, one of the zones, and also playing it when I'm playing the Korg. So I may have to change up this sound to having a dual piano. So if I do that, I'll switch over to this deep grand piano on this sound. Now that is on channel 1. So if I come over here and I play the piano on my Korg, I'm actually playing the Korg piano coupled with this Roland deep virtual grand. And you'll see, I'm going to turn the Korg down so there's no sound coming out of the Korg, and you'll notice the sound is exactly the same. So they're actually the same. So right now, I've got the Korg off. I've got the MIDI notes going out through my Ableton Live software, and they're just sending note information to the Roland Fantom, and so it is playing the virtual grand scene or program on the Roland Fantom. But when I turn up the volume on the Korg, now I've got, it's called piano and constant voice. It's kind of a piano with a voice background, and that's also added that now to the virtual piano on the Roland Fantom. So this is a much purer sound. This is just a virtual piano. But now listen when I go over to the Korg, the difference. So you can tell there's a little more ambiance, more than just a piano. I could play two pianos together, and it would sound more, because I'll turn the Korg to just a pure piano. So the Korg is adding its piano and the Fantom together. If I turn the Fantom down, you can just hear what the Korg Kronos Berlin piano sounds like. I don't, this is an older piano model on the Korg. I think it's dated back to about 2012. I like the deep grand on the Fantom better. This is a model that they have created for the grand piano. So it's more than just a sampled piano, which the Korg is more of a sampled piano. So, but when I add them together, the Berlin piano coupled with the virtual Roland Fantom piano, deep grand, it just adds more ambience to the piano. Having said that, I actually like the piano and constant voice, this other scene or the other combination on the Korg coupled with the virtual piano. It just adds even a little bit more background ambiance. That's with the Berlin piano and the virtual piano. But here is the piano and constant voice. So you can tell when I go back to the piano, it doesn't have that voice in the background. It's more pure piano, which I love in certain very simple so again, when I'm creating piano textures in my improvisation, I have a wide variety of different piano variations. There's another one here that's called multiple non-virtual grands, and it's an echoey kind of a Now, from there I can go so many different, this is called Piano Thang. And here's a bright grand piano. And there's a whole bunch of other variations. The ones that I really do like, though, are, I do like the virtual grand. It's a very nice sound, very pure sound. So I like that one, and I also like the multi non-virtual piano grand. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the fanfare to start out, but I've got piano over here, the piano and constant voices. Now up on my Roland Prologue, I'm going to use the runner blade, and it sounds like this. So I've got that variation. And so I've got 4 different, very, very different sounds. And then if I want to, now I'm already using the top manual for the bass, like I said. So it's tied to my Studio Logic pedal board down below here. But the other keyboard, the Matriarch, I love its arpeggiation. It can create a really interesting, unique style. I actually create an automated arpeggiation with a very fast repeater on it, so it's just a very ethereal kind of a sound. Now, what that is on the Matriarch is there's an option on the Matriarch, the Moog Matriarch, to take all 4 oscillators and either create individual tones for each oscillator or to gang them together so that all of them are playing at once. If I play just one oscillator at a time, it's not as rich. It can't create as much ambiance because, again, I'm just creating one oscillator, which creates one frequency. But when I add multiple oscillators together, the interesting thing about an analog synth is the oscillators are not tuned exactly the same. And so you get a very slow beat frequency coming in, which constructs a much richer sound. I'll play a little bit for you. I'm going to go between 1 oscillator per note and 4, and you'll hear the difference. One of them is louder. The 4 together is louder than playing one at a time. But when I do play the 4 and I create just a little bit of variation on the frequency between those oscillators, you hear this really rich ensemble sound. It's like phased sound. That is one oscillator. Now I'm going to switch it so that each note is actually taking 2 oscillators to play. Now I'm going to switch it over so that all oscillators are playing each note together. Now you may not be able to tell that there's different frequencies in there, but there are 4 independent oscillators operating together. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the frequency just a little bit on some of those oscillators so you can hear what happens when the tone is just slightly out of pitch with respect to each other. It creates a much richer, kind of a complex texture. If I get too far out, you can hear it gets a little bit mushy. But when you get them close, but enough, what you hear is a very slow beat frequency, because when you put 2 oscillators together that are very similar in frequency, but just off a little bit, you create a very slow, what's called beat frequency that adds that ambience to the analog synths. So that's what I like doing, because it really does add a lot of texture, and that's why an analog synth sometimes is so much richer than a digital synth, unless it's been programmed to be more analog and create that dissonance, that frequency dissonance. the issue with that is when I've got the Moog Matriarch set to unison, all four oscillators playing at once, I cannot play two keys at the same time. I can only play one key at a time. So in order to create any kind of a chord on the Moog Matriarch, I have to put it into a mode where each oscillator is playing a different note. There, then, I don't get that rich texture in each note. So I'll play a little bit to just show you. So that last sound, I switched it to a single oscillator per note, and therefore on that I can play up to 4 notes. The beauty on the digital workstations is you can play a huge number of notes at once because it's a digital workstation, so it's actually being able to create multiple tones, multiple frequencies at the same time. The other analog device up here, the Roland Prologue, has 16 voices. It's one of the most, for 16 voice analog at the price point that this Roland Prologue is, it's pretty amazing. It has a lot of polyphony for the price for an analog synth. Okay, so I went through all the keyboards. I'm going to switch my Moog back to a single voice playing all 4 oscillators at the same time. And I'm going to turn on the arpeggiation, which are the 2 buttons, those 2 lighted buttons down here. They create the arpeggiation pattern, so when I play multiple notes, they'll continue to pattern and cycle through that. There's many ways to set up arpeggiation on there. I can create a sequence, there's just a lot of variations. But usually I just use that for kind of a background arpeggiation sound. And it'll keep playing until I shut it off. Now, the other thing I can do on the Matriarch is I can slow that arpeggiation rate down. The other beautiful thing about the Matriarch is I can create, between notes, I can create a glissando. So there's an option here. I can rotate that so when I play one note and then they play the next note, it will actually move the oscillator frequency slowly from the first note to the second note. And I can change the frequency of that change with this knob. This is without it on. But here's with it all the way up. So you can create some very interesting things. Now, if you're playing too fast, it will sound weird. So you can create some very strange effects, but if I create it so the velocity's fast enough, it'll just sound kind of very rounded sound. Okay. Sorry, I kind of get into some of the variations. There's so much power in these instruments. By the way, there's a lot of power on these digital workstations to do very similar things, but it's more complicated. And a lot of times what they call, you got to do menu diving into the menu to try to get that to work. But the Roland has got a whole bunch of different variations up here to change oscillator frequencies and so forth. And but when I'm playing improvisationally, it's a little more challenging to do that. If I was creating a piece from scratch and I'm spending a lot of time perfecting all the stops, it's a very different creation process. Okay, so let me get back to playing. Again, we've got this sound. And then I've got the fanfare. And again, the chords I'm playing are pretty straightforward. I've talked about them in the past tutorials, but they're all notes, all chords that are part of the A minor scale, and they're very compatible. And then in order to create variations, I'm inverting those chords, and I'm also changing the chords into arpeggiating the chords, and then using grace notes and so forth. So, okay, so let me try out and see what this is going to sound like here. I'll just try a little bit. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to go ahead and use my pedal board. I'm going to use the pipe organ. I've got the piano set up here. In order to play the piano, I'm probably going to have to switch over to the digital virtual grand on the Fantom when I do that. I've got the Blade Runner blade sound. So here we go. What you notice is I'm playing the same chords, but it's very different with different sounds and textures together. So I'm just playing A minor, G major, F major, D minor, E major, A minor. Those are the main chords I'm using. And sometimes I might use a sixth, or I might change the fundamental note and so forth. But again, there's so much power in changing the tonality of the chords to make them sound very different. So the piano texture and playing individual notes in those chords make a very different sound than playing the fanfare, you know. So if I'm coming out here, that is the same chord structure as I play over here on the piano, but hear the difference, of course. I'm embellishing that a little bit, but again, they are very similar chords. They're in the A minor scale. Again, but they sound so completely different that as an improvisational player, you can get away with a lot of simplicity by changing the tonality and the way you play the keys tied to those same chords. Same thing up on the Prologue up here, the Korg. Now, when I play this Blade Runner, very ethereal, brassing sound, I'm going to play slow and mysteriously. Now what I'm going to do is, because I want to have a little difference, you can play things that are very similar, but you just change one note and it makes all the difference in the world. So instead of playing the E major chord, you'll hear I'm going to go to A minor to G major to D minor to E major, but when I go to the E major chord, I'm going to keep the fundamental on D. And that's going to make a completely different sound. Here, listen to it. By the way, here's what it sounds on the piano. Now, I'm going to do the same thing up on the Prologue, but the last chord, I'm going to not have the E as the fundamental for the E major chord, but I'm going to have a D at the foundation. Notice that right there, I've created a suspense. So in other words, if I was going to the straight E major chord, I would normally go back to an A minor. But with that, I have a lot of variation because it's like waiting, it's not resolved as well. So. Now what you'll notice is I went down to an A minor, but I played a foundational note of C with the A minor scale. And instead of playing A minor completely, I used the D. So instead I'm using an A, D, and E. And going from the D to the C. classical music, there's this concept of like this, oh gosh, I forget the term, but it's like you're sustaining the notes, you're creating, like, you're not going straight to the actual foundational chord, but so yeah, you can play around with this. I want to get into the theory in detail, because the real key is the key to playing improvisation is having the freedom to try some things out and see whether they work for you. But in classical music, a lot of those sustains. So you don't go straight to the A minor. You go from diminished chord to the A minor. Okay, so again, it creates more texture. It creates, like, in this concept of the E major chord with the D minor foundation, or D foundation. So with very simple techniques that center around playing those chords that are in the progression you want, but just moving those, having grace notes in those chords, and then flowing into the foundational chord. So play around with playing a chord, and then okay, and especially if you're playing in very complex scales and chord or key signatures, it gets a little more difficult. But in A minor, because most of the chords are on the white notes, you don't have to worry about too much of getting into too much work. You just there's a couple, because the E major scale, E major chord has a G sharp, but most of the chords and most of the keys you're playing are on the white notes. The other nice thing is if you're playing in A minor and you want to resolve to kind of a nice ending, you can change it from the A minor, which is A, C, and E, to the A major, which is an A, C sharp, E. So and again, there we go. Okay, so if you're doing improvisation, you're playing around, and you want to create something that's kind of unique and changes up the sounds, and you got multiple keyboards, work on the patterns you want to play, and if you do have a pedal board, it is really cool, but you got to train your feet to use those pedals, of course. An organist is used to that because that's what they do. They've got two hands on multiple keyboards, and then they've got a 32-note pedal board, which gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of how to play, that full instrument. Okay, so now I'm just going to go ahead. It's almost an hour tutorial here. I'm just going to upload this. I'm going to see if people, enjoy listening to this. It's really for people who are, wanting to work on playing improvisation with multiple synthesizer keyboards and samplers and so forth. I figured I'd share a little bit of my technique on picking out sounds and ideas to switch from keyboards and so forth. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and just try out a variation of all these sounds and make an improv of maybe 10, 15 minutes here, and then we'll be done. Okay, take care, everyone. Hope it's useful. If it's not, sorry, I'll make it a tutorial so it's not something to listen to in the background of a meditation or something. Okay, take care. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye. Test.